Hi everyone, my name is Allie and welcome to my channel. So today, obviously, we are doing my January wrap-up. I am so excited to talk about these books with you guys. I ended up reading 8 books, in the month of January, and I didn't really have like any books that I feel super passionately about, but I also didn't have any books that I like absolutely hated. So I think it's kind of a win, a little bit of a loss, because like I was hoping that I would find a book that I really loved, but I also was able to completely divert myself away from a complete reading slump, because in the beginning of the month I was so worried that I just like would not even finish a book in January. I just felt like I could not find a book I wanted to read. I kept starting and stopping books, and it just like was not conducive to me finishing a book, even if I liked it or didn't like it. Thankfully, I was able to finish 8 books, like I said, and I just can't wait to talk about them with you guys because I have a lot of opinions about these books, even though most of them got like somewhere around like a 3 or 4 star rating. So we're gonna start off with the first book, which was actually our pick for my book club. If you are interested, I run a book club on Discord, and it's very, very casual. It's very much like go at your own pace, do your own thing. All we're doing is reading the same book and discussing it every month. And at the beginning of every month, or I guess at the end of every month, I do a little poll on Instagram, and you can choose which book that we read. And I just take, you know, the most popular book, and that's what we read. And so in January, we ended up reading All the Lovers in the Night by Mieko Kawakami. And I ended up giving this book a 4 out of 5 stars. I ended up really enjoying it. It's not one of my new favorites, but it was definitely something that made me think, especially after the book was completely done. I had initially wanted to read Breasts and Eggs by the same author, but then I found All the Lovers in the Night, and I felt like it'd be the kind of the perfect book to start off January with, because it's about this young woman and she feels kind of aimless in her life. She feels a little bit out of control, and she's just trying to figure out what she wants to do with her life, where she wants to go. She's looking for some guidance, and I felt like that would be a really good book to read during January. And a lot of you guys agreed, and so we ended up reading it. And I found this book to be really intriguing, mainly because of the prose. It was very subtle, very almost simplistic, but in a really beautiful way. And it took a lot of these larger ideas of like, what is your place in the universe? What does time mean? What does space mean? And it really made them a lot more palatable and a lot more applicable to like an everyday scenario. And it really goes into topics of like alcoholism and seclusion, and it's just like a very kind of like nebulous novel. It doesn't really have a specific plot that you can just kind of boil this book down to, but it really does focus on this main character and just her struggles in life and the messiness of finding yourself when you're like a young adult. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one, and I do highly recommend it. The next book that I ended up reading, I don't quite recommend, but I feel like it comes with a bit of a caveat, and that is Winter by Allie Smith. This is part of her quartet of seasonal books. So there's fall, winter, spring, and summer. I've already read fall, and I loved fall. 5 out of 5 stars, one of my favorite books of all time. Beautifully written, a really great like social commentary, and just like, it's such a good book. It's so interesting and so many good quotes. And then I decided to pick up Winter during obviously the winter, and I unfortunately did not like this book nearly as much as fall. I had 2 kind of main issues with this book. So the first one really comes with the characters. I just felt like every character in this book, you follow an older woman, her son, and his girlfriend, or like his situationship sort of thing. It's kind of like complicated to explain, but you're following these 3 characters, and they're all so frustrating. They're all so like just infuriating to read, and they all just kind of make very questionable choices, and not in a way that's like interesting, but really in a way that I'm just like, what does this do for the character? What does this do for the plot? I'm really confused as to why this author created these characters in this way. It just didn't really make sense to me. And I also felt like a lot of the elements of this book were kind of rehashed from Autumn, but Autumn did it better. Did I say fall before? I'm such an American. Autumn. The book is Autumn. I literally have it right here. Why did I say fall? It's Autumn. Anyway, that's gonna bug the crap out of me. Anyway, I just felt like a lot of the commentary was really rehashed from Autumn. It was a lot of kind of the same things, and I just think it's really interesting that like these are British books written by a British author, and so much of the political commentary is about the US, but it's like very surface level, and it's very obvious that it comes from somebody who is not American, so it just feels a little weird, and it doesn't really translate well into obviously an American audience, at least in my opinion. Other people might disagree, that's totally fine, but I just felt like a lot of the things that were said in this novel were kind of already said in Autumn, so I didn't really love it all that much. And I also felt like it didn't really correlate to its season in the way that Autumn did. Autumn was a lot about like transition and transitional phases and stuff like that, and Winter didn't really have a lot of themes that I would necessarily correlate to Winter, if that makes sense. Like when I think of Winter, I think of themes like death and loss and the afterlife and seclusion and stuff like that, so it just didn't feel like it really had any of those themes. I guess you could kind of say that there is some a vague kind of theme of like the mother character is kind of estranged from her family, from her sister specifically in a way, and I guess that could kind of be a correlating theme to the season of Winter, but like it just didn't work for me. I was a little bummed, but I'm definitely gonna keep on with this series because I do actually own Spring as well, so I'm gonna get to this book during the springtime, probably after my birthday. My birthday's March 25th and is at the very beginning of spring, so I probably won't pick that up until like April or May. Let me take a sip on my coffee. Also, it is raining a bit today, so if you hear rain in the background or a lot of wind or whatever, we get a lot of wind here, so it's gonna be really windy, really rainy. The lighting is just what it is, so just kind of wanted to give you guys that heads up. The next book that I read was Blue Sisters by Coco Mellers, and I ended up giving this book a 4 out of 5 stars. I have been really looking forward to this book, so I was super excited when I was actually able to get the audiobook from my library. And this one is really interesting. It follows 3 sisters, and technically there are 3 of 4, but the 4th sister has passed away before the events of the book. And so you really get to see each of these very distinct sisters deal with the aftermath of their other sister's death and the kind of like separation of their family. Like all the sisters have kind of gone off in their own directions. Some of them aren't talking to each other. Some of them are on weird semi-bad terms. They have a lot of issues with their parents. Their dad was kind of an alcoholic, and their mom just was a little bit bulldozed by their father and didn't ever really stick up for the girls. So they're dealing with a lot of family drama, which I love in a book. I really love the family drama narrative. I think it's really interesting. And last year I ended up watching the movie from Netflix called His 3 Daughters, and it is very similar to this book. That movie follows 3 daughters who are in the process of losing their father, and they are all very different in different walks of life, very different kinds of people with different personalities, and they all have to come together during their father's passing. So very, very similar narratives, and I liked both pretty equally. I think I liked the movie a little bit more, but this book was also really good, and I thought that each of the sisters were really well fleshed out. I understood a lot of their motivations, and their personalities were interesting. And overall, I just really liked the family drama narrative in this book. Was it the most impressive book that I've ever read? No, but it was really entertaining. And as someone who doesn't have sisters, it was really interesting to kind of get to look into a family that is only sisters. I am really intrigued though to read other books from Coco Mellors, because I know that there's another one. I believe it's Cleopatra and Frankenstein. Is that what it's called? I haven't read that one yet, but I do really, really want to. The next book that I ended up reading was A Passionate Mind in Relentless Pursuit, The Vision of Mary McLeod Bethune by Nolwenn Rooks. And this is a nonfiction book, very obviously about the life of Mary Bethune, and she was a really interesting American figure and had a lot of influence over securing rights for Black people and securing adequate education for Black children. And she was a really interesting figure to read about. I've never heard about her story before, so I was really excited to find this book on Libby, I believe. And it was really, really intriguing, very educational, very informative. And I also really liked the way that the author seemed very passionate about this person's life and this person's legacy, and I thought that that was really inspiring and really added to the emotional depth of this book. Because, you know, you could just read a biography of somebody and it's going to be very cold and cut and dry and, you know, whatever, but this author made a very obvious intentional act of like adding in her own emotions into this biography and really contextualized it within not only the present day but also just like her life. And so I really enjoyed that. I highly recommend this one. It's very short, a very quick read. And yeah, if you also haven't heard of Mary Bethune, highly, highly recommend picking up this book. The next book I ended up reading was In Every Mirror She's Black by Lola Akinmade Åkerström. And this is an adult contemporary fiction book, and it follows these 3 Black women who are living in Sweden and are kind of intrinsically connected through this one white Swedish man. And this man, he's like, I don't know if he's like a billionaire, I guess he kind of is, but he runs this company and he is like a very young CEO. And like I said, each of these 3 women are connected to this man in some way. One of them is his wife, one of them works for him, and one of them is connected to him through his charity work. And it's a really interesting narrative. So you get to kind of see into the lives of each of these 3 women and their experiences, not only with this man, but also like in the landscape of a white Sweden. And I think it's a really interesting commentary on race and gender and living in the world and living in specifically Sweden, which is a pretty white country, as a Black woman. And there is also this like really interesting twist at the end that I probably should have seen coming, but completely took me by surprise and really put so many things that happened in this book into context. And I just found this book to be really, really intriguing. I didn't absolutely love this book. However, I feel like this is one that is going to stick with me for a while and that I'm going to be thinking about for a while, mainly because of the implications of the twist at the end. It was just so almost like chilling in a way. And I like hesitate to say that this is like just like a contemporary fiction novel because it feels like that's so reductive. There is like this element of not necessarily horror or thriller, but something very adjacent to that. Just something very much off about the things that happen in this book. And I think that that is a bit of a commentary on what it's like to be a Black woman in the world, is that there's just something underlying everything that is a little bit unsettling, a little bit chilling. and I really enjoyed this author's really unique perspective, because I've never read a book by a Black author who is from a country like Sweden. I just thought it was like really interesting, and this book is part of a series. I don't think I'm going to read the second book, mainly because I felt like where the first book ended was perfect. I don't think I need to know anything else, and I think that there sometimes is a little bit of like an over-explaining that happens when a contemporary novel gets a sequel. I'm like, I don't need to be over-explained the rest of like everything else. I kind of want to leave it up to my imagination and kind of leave it up to like thinking about, wow, what does all of this mean and what could possibly happen after the book is over. I don't really want to be told exactly what happens after the book is over, if you know what I mean. I feel like just like the older I get, the less intrigued I am by series, personally. The next book that I read in January was finally one that I physically own. I need to get better at this, but I ended up reading We Were the Universe by Kimberly King Parsons, and this is an adult contemporary novel again, and this book follows a young mother who is kind of trying to navigate her place in the world after she has had her daughter, and she has also lost her beloved sister. And that does sound really heavy, and there are definitely heavy parts of this book, but overall it's really comedic and very kind of like darkly funny, and I think that it shows motherhood in such an interesting light. I actually just recently attempted to watch the movie Night Bitch, and I got about halfway through and I'm just like, not feeling it. And then I ended up picking up this book, and I feel like this is what Night Bitch was trying to do and just wasn't working. You know what I mean? Like, I haven't read the book Night Bitch, I will say, but the movie itself that I can speak on, it didn't work for me, and I just felt like it didn't really have something to say about itself. And I feel like We Were the Universe actually does have something to say about motherhood, and has like a unique perspective on motherhood. This main character is strange and kind of unsettling in some of the things that she thinks about, but it's so raw and honest, and I just feel like you don't really get to see that perspective or that portrayal of mothers a lot in literature, and this was definitely very refreshing. And you really get to see her as like this fully fleshed out human being, a human that, you know, has sexuality and has connections to people and thinks about things and has judgments and has assumptions, and, you know, she has complex friendships and complex relationships with the people in her life. And I really love this book, and I would love to know if any other people who have read this, who are mothers, have read this book and feel the same way, because I personally really enjoyed it. I'm not a mother, but I think a lot of this main character reminded me of my own mom, and so I really saw a lot of her in this book, and I think that was really important and really special. So I really enjoyed this one, gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I do highly recommend it. It was really funny, I will say that. It was really funny. The next book that I ended up reading was A Song to Drown Rivers by Anne Lang, and I think I gave this book a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I really wanted to love this book. I wanted to love it so bad. I ended up picking up this book. It's like a romantasy. I wasn't quite sure if it was YA or adult. I couldn't really find a definitive answer on that, so if you know the answer to that question, definitely leave it down in the comments below. But like I said, it's a romantasy, and basically it's about this young woman, and she in her village is considered extremely beautiful, and she knows it, which I think is really refreshing. I feel like you don't get to see very many fantasy protagonists who are beautiful and know it. Maybe that's changed in the last few years. I feel like it maybe has, but I've been reading fantasy since I was a little girl, and I feel like you always see these protagonists who are like just like effortlessly, naturally beautiful, but they don't know it, and they're just like, I'm so plain, and then like everybody's in love with them, and then you're like, okay, yeah, you're so plain, I get it. So it was kind of refreshing to see a main character who is like, I'm beautiful and I know it, And I've been told it my entire life, so like why wouldn't I know it? But anyway, she ends up running into this guy and he ends up being really important to this sort of like revolutionary effort. And so he ends up recruiting her in order to seduce the king that they want to overthrow, and she is going to be kind of like one of his concubines. And so she ends up training with the guy that recruited her, and once he feels like she's ready, he sends her to the palace and she goes to live with this king who she's always seen as like this tyrant and unfeeling, unloving. And she ends up meeting him, and a lot of her perspectives kind of start to shift in a way that's very uncomfortable to her, and you really feel that through the narrative of like her battling her inner emotions of like, I'm supposed to hate this person, and I have never really known who this person is. I've only known what they have shown us, and it's cruelty. But now that she has gotten to know him and has been around him more, she has started to see the human underneath a lot of those like cruel actions, or like those like very distant actions. And it's really intriguing, and I think that there could be a world where this book does something a little bit different and doesn't rely on its very loose like romantasy plot, because this main character is supposed to be in love with the guy that recruited her, the one that's like part of this revolutionary effort, and you just don't see it throughout this narrative. Unfortunately, you really only get to see them interact at the very beginning and then at the very end, and nothing really in between. There is like 1 or 2 scenes of them together in between, but for the most part she is with the king, who she is starting to kind of get feelings for. And I think there could be a world where this book has some sort of like social commentary on what it's like to fall in love with somebody that you are probably not supposed to fall in love with. It could have been more of a situation of like The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins, which I think did a really good job at showing this despicable tyrant of a person in the making, and his twisted kind of love story, but also not love story, with the female protagonist. And like, it could have been that. In a perfect world, it could have been that. But I think that it got really limited by its romantasy genre, which was really a bummer, because it could have been such a good book. I could have loved it, but it didn't go that far. It didn't go there. It almost did. There's a scene towards the end where I was like enthralled. I loved it, but it never really saw it to fruition. So unfortunately, I did give it 3.5 stars. It wasn't my favorite. I do think that it's a really interesting addition to the romantasy genre, but I don't really think that it's much of a romance, you know what I mean? So unfortunately, didn't end up loving this book the way I should have. And the very last book that I read in January was The House of My Mother, A Daughter's Quest for Freedom by Sherry Frankie. And if you don't know who Sherry Frankie is, she is the eldest daughter from the YouTube channel 8 Passengers. And if you didn't watch them on YouTube, I didn't watch them on YouTube personally. I don't really like family vlogging channels, but if you didn't watch them there, you might have heard of them from the YouTube channels Funny Fridays or Jordan and McKay, or you also heard about them in the news because her mom and her mom's therapist kind of person got into a lot of legal trouble when it was revealed that they were abusing the Frankie children. So this book is obviously written by the eldest daughter who was able to get out of that situation, and she is telling her own story. And something I really loved about this memoir is that she is telling her story. She's not telling her siblings' stories. She's not trying to talk for them. She's really focusing mainly on her experience within her family and her experience with her mom specifically. And I felt like this was really, really brave. And I was reading this and I would just like get chills from almost every single story that she would tell about her childhood. it was truly so disturbing in such like almost a mundane way, which is like even more chilling, if that makes sense. Like, so much of what happened to her is just like everyday run-of-the-mill abuse that just gets shoved under the rug in families, and seeing it kind of compiled in this one memoir, and it happening over and over and over again, and escalating and escalating and escalating. So chilling. This book was so important, and I think that it opens up a really important conversation about family vlogging, about abuse within families, and the way that people can abuse and twist religion into their own gain. And there's so much in this book, and I highly recommend it. If you are somebody, obviously you're watching this on YouTube, if you enjoy YouTube, if you watch vlogs, even if they're not family vlogs, I think that this is something that everybody could read and get something from. And I really enjoyed this book. It was really interesting. She does the narration for the audiobook, so I highly recommend the audiobook. And yeah, it was just a really great book, really interesting. If you want any more information, or if you're interested in the YouTube channels that I did mention, Fundy Fridays and Jordan McKay, I will leave the links down below. But yeah, highly recommend this memoir. It was so good. Okay, so those were all of the books that I read in January. I had a really interesting reading month, as you could probably tell. And let me know down below in the comments if you've read any of these books, what you thought about them, if you liked them, if you didn't like them. And if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And you can go ahead and follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Goodreads, Storygraph, Threads, Blue Sky. All the links should be down below, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye!